The silence was the loudest thing in the chapel. It was a living entity, thick and suffocating, pressing down on the 200 guests who stared at me, their piteous physical weight on my shoulders. The organist had stopped playing 10 minutes ago. The minister kept clearing his throat. My maid of honor, Chloe, was a statue of helpless sympathy beside me, her knuckles white where she clutched my bouquet. 20 years old, and my life was ending in a cloud of white tulle and public humiliation. David wasn't coming. The back of my neck prickled. It was a specific, intense sensation, the feeling of being watched not with pity, but with calculation. I risked a glance over my shoulder, past the sea of stricken faces. In the last pew, a man sat alone. He hadn't been on the guest list. I would have remembered. He was immaculate in a charcoal suit that looked like it was woven from shadow and steel, a stark contrast to the pastel morning suits of the other men. His posture was absolute, a straight line of disciplined stillness. He wasn't looking at me with pity. His eyes, dark and unreadable even from this distance, were assessing me. It was the look of a predator sizing up an unexpected opportunity. A low murmur rippled through the guests. My mother started to sob, a quiet, hiccuping sound that broke what little composure I had left. This was it. The final, undeniable confirmation. He'd left me. Here. In front of everyone I had ever known. My vision swam, the stained glass windows blurring into a kaleidoscope of meaningless color. I felt a tremor start in my hands, a prelude to a complete collapse. Then, a presence was beside me. The man from the back pew. He had moved with such impossible silence that no one had noticed his approach until he was there, standing just at the edge of my peripheral vision. The air around him was cool, scented with something clean and sharp, like cedar and cold night air. "They are about to call the time of death on your dignity," he whispered, his voice a low, smooth murmur meant only for me. It was devoid of sympathy. It was a statement of fact. I flinched, turning to face him fully. Up close, his stillness was even more pronounced. He was Japanese, with features that looked as if they were carved from some unforgiving, beautiful stone. A single, thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, a flaw that only highlighted the unnerving perfection of his face. His eyes held mine, and I felt pinned, examined, and understood in a way that was both terrifying and electrifying. "What do you want?" I managed, my own voice a pathetic croak. "An arrangement," he said, his gaze unwavering. "You need a groom. I, unexpectedly, need a wife. Your fiancé's failure can be our mutual success." I stared at him, convinced the shock had finally made me hallucinate. "You're insane." "I am practical," he corrected softly. "Look at them, Naomi," he said my name. I had never heard it spoken with such precision, as if it were a word he had owned for years. "They are waiting for you to fall apart. They are hungry for the drama. Do not give them the satisfaction." He was right. I could feel their eyes, their morbid curiosity. Chloe was whispering my name, trying to get me to turn back, to leave the altar. But leaving meant admitting defeat. It meant walking back down that aisle alone, a spectacle of rejection. The man leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower, a velvet rumble that sent a shiver through me despite the heat of my shame. "Pretend to marry me now. Walk out of this chapel on my arm. Deny them their story." The world tilted. The proposition was madness. A life raft made of dynamite. But drowning in the silence of this room felt like a worse death. I looked from his impossibly calm face to the minister's panicked one, to my mother's tear-streaked cheeks. He was offering me an escape. A bizarre, terrifying, and utterly defiant one. "Why?" I whispered, the word barely audible. "Why me?" A flicker of something unreadable passed through his dark eyes. "You were in the right place at the wrong time. Or perhaps, the wrong place at the right time. The reasons are my own. All you need to decide is if you prefer humiliation or opportunity." He held out his hand. It was a surgeon's hand, long-fingered and steady. There were no calluses, only an air of lethal confidence. Tucked just under the starched white cuff of his shirt, I saw the edge of a tattoo, the dark blue scales of a dragon. I looked at that hand. Then I looked back down the aisle, at the life I thought I was going to have, now a smoldering ruin. I had two choices: walk back through the wreckage alone, or take the hand of the handsome, terrifying stranger who moved through my disaster like he owned it. My hand was shaking as I lifted it. I placed it in his. His skin was cool, his grip firm and absolute. It was not a comforting hold. It was a claim. He turned to the stunned minister. "There's been a change," he said, his voice carrying through the silent chapel with effortless authority. "The wedding will proceed." That was the moment everything changed. Before I could process the sheer insanity of my decision, I was standing beside him at the altar. He supplied a name to the minister, Tatsuya Ishikawa, and my ceremony was hijacked. He guided me through the vows with quiet, firm prompts, his hand a constant, possessive weight at the small of my back. When he slid a heavy, cool platinum band onto my finger, it felt less like a ring and more like a manacle. I said, "I do," in a daze, the words tasting like ash and ozone. The kiss was not a kiss. It was a sealing of a contract. His lips were firm, dry, and brief against mine, a clinical press that held no warmth but communicated absolute possession. When he pulled back, his eyes were like chips of obsidian. He had gotten what he wanted, and in doing so, he had taken me with it. We walked back down the aisle to a stunned, chaotic silence. No one clapped. No one threw rice. They just stared as I, Naomi Clark, who was supposed to be marrying David, walked out into the blinding sunlight on the arm of a man whose name I had only learned 2 minutes ago. He led me to a black car, a gleaming, predatory vehicle with windows so dark they reflected the world like a black mirror. A driver held the door open, his head bowed. Tatsuya guided me inside, the door closing with a solid, final thud that sealed me off from my old life. The car moved with silent, electric grace through the streets of a city I no longer recognized. I stared out the window, watching my world slide by, feeling utterly disconnected from it. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice flat. The shock was beginning to curdle into a cold, hard knot of fear in my stomach. "Home," Tatsuya replied, not looking at me. He was looking at his phone, his thumb moving with swift, economical strokes across the screen. "That's not an answer," I shot back, a spark of my old self finally igniting. "My home is a 2-bedroom apartment over a bookstore. I have a cat. I have a life." He finally turned his head, his gaze pinning me to the plush leather seat. "Your life, as you knew it, ended at that altar. You have a new one now." The temperature in the car seemed to drop by 10 degrees. "The apartment has been taken care of. Your belongings will be brought to the penthouse. The cat will be looked after. You can't just—" "I can," he interrupted, the words sharp and final. "I have. You made a choice, Naomi. This is the consequence." We drove to the most exclusive part of the city, to a skyscraper of black glass and steel that pierced the clouds. The car descended into a private underground garage, and we were whisked up a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse that was less a home and more a monument to wealth and power. The floors were polished black marble, the furniture was minimalist and severe, and one entire wall was a sheet of glass offering a god's-eye view of the city below. It was beautiful, sterile, and as cold as the man standing beside me. For the next week, I lived in that beautiful cage. My things arrived as promised, but they looked small and out of place in the vast, empty rooms. Tatsuya was a ghost. He would be gone before I woke and return late at night, long after I had retreated to the guest suite he had assigned me. We existed in the same space, but in different orbits. I learned he was a doctor, a surgeon of some renown, from a stray piece of mail I saw on a console table. It did little to explain the dragon tattoo, the armed guards posted in the lobby, or the palpable sense of danger that clung to him like his cologne. The hook that pulled me deeper into the truth came on a Thursday night. I couldn't sleep. The silence of the penthouse was as oppressive as the silence in the chapel had been. I padded out into the main living area, drawn to the glittering expanse of the city lights. Tatsuya was there, standing by the window, his back to me. He was on the phone, speaking in a low, urgent tone. The Hashimoto patriarch is not a patient man, Tatsuya was saying. He expected the alliance. He expected my submission. There was a pause. The marriage changes the board. It buys us time. An unknown element. A foreign wife with no ties. She is the perfect shield. They cannot leverage her against me if they do not know who she is, or where her loyalties lie. My blood ran cold. Shield. An unknown element. It wasn't an act of bizarre chivalry. It wasn't an impulse. It was a move in a game I didn't understand, and I was the pawn. I had traded one humiliation for another, escaping a public spectacle only to become a private strategy. He must have sensed me. He ended the call without a goodbye and turned slowly. In the dim light from the city below, his face was all sharp angles and deep shadows. "You should be in bed," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. "If it was your shield." The question came out sharper than I intended. He didn't feign ignorance. He simply inclined his head, a bare acknowledgement. "You were a solution to a complex problem. And what happens when the problem is solved?" I demanded, my fear making me bold. "Am I discarded? Sent back to my little apartment with a story no one will ever believe?" He walked toward me, his movements fluid and silent. He stopped just a foot away, close enough that I could feel the cold radiating from him. "The Hashimoto clan will not stop looking for a weakness," he said, his voice a low thrum. "As long as you wear my ring, you are my weakness. Therefore, I will not let you go." The stakes snapped into terrifying focus. This wasn't just about saving face. I had stumbled into a war. That rehooked me, not with curiosity, but with the cold, sharp teeth of survival. My life was no longer my own. It was tied to his, and his life was steeped in a danger that was only just beginning to reveal itself. The danger escalated faster than I could have imagined. A few days later, Tatsuya informed me that we would be attending a charity gala. "You will be seen on my arm," he stated, leaving no room for argument. A black dress was delivered to my room, a sheath of silk so exquisitely made it felt like a second skin. It was elegant, severe, and made me feel like a stranger in my own body. At the gala, I saw the other side of Tatsuya's world. The polite smiles of the city's elite didn't quite reach their eyes when they looked at him. There was fear there, and a deference that went beyond respect for a wealthy doctor. He moved through the glittering crowd like a shark navigating a school of fish. And I was tethered to him, my hand on his arm, a silent declaration to everyone who watched. We were leaving, walking through a manicured garden path toward the car, when it happened. Two men materialized from the shadows of a large cypress tree. They moved with a purpose that was terrifyingly clear. I saw the glint of steel before I fully registered the threat. Tatsuya reacted without thinking. In one fluid motion, he spun, shoving me behind him so hard I stumbled against the stone retaining wall. His body became a wall in front of me. The sounds were muted and brutally fast, a sickening thud, a choked gasp, a spray of something warm against my cheek. I didn't see what he did, but when it was over, two bodies lay motionless on the manicured grass. Tatsuya stood over them, his breathing even, his suit barely disturbed. He was a machine of lethal precision. He turned to me, his eyes scanning me for injury. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, unable to speak, my heart hammering against my ribs. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping the blood from my cheek. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence I had just witnessed. In that moment, under the cold moonlight, I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of raw, unguarded emotion. It looked like regret, or perhaps shame. This was his wound, the one he carried. The shame of what his world did to others. He had failed to protect someone before. I knew it with an instinct that defied logic. He had shielded me with his body not just to protect an asset, but to prevent a ghost from repeating itself. The drive back to the penthouse was silent. His head of security, a grim-faced man named Tanaka, had appeared out of nowhere, dealt with the bodies, and driven us away with chilling efficiency. When we were back in the sterile safety of the penthouse, Tatsuya poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to me. "You should leave," he said, his voice flat as he stared into the amber liquid. "Tanaka can have you on a plane to anywhere you want to go by morning. We will create a story. An annulment. No one will bother you again." He was offering me an out. The smart choice, the sane choice, was to take it. To run back to my quiet life of books and archives and forget the dragon tattoo, the scent of cedar, and the feeling of his body shielding mine. But as I looked at him, standing there with the weight of his violent world on his shoulders, I saw the crack in his marble facade. I saw the man who carried a shame so deep it had carved itself into his soul. And I heard myself say the words that would seal my fate. "No," I said, my voice steady. "They tried to kill us. They came after us. I'm not running." He looked up, and for the first time, I saw genuine surprise in his eyes. I had made a deliberate choice. I chose to stay. Not for him, not yet. But for myself. I would not be a pawn who was run off the board. The moment of charged silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken things. He was the most dangerous man I had ever met, and I had just refused to leave his side. The war was no longer just his. It was ours. The decision to stay changed the atmosphere in the penthouse. The invisible line between his space and my space began to blur. He started speaking to me, not just giving orders. He would tell me about a difficult surgery, his words clinical and precise, but the act of sharing was an intimacy in itself. I would find him in his study late at night, a medical journal open, a glass of whiskey at his elbow, the silence around him heavy with thoughts he never voiced. I started leaving a cup of tea for him. He never acknowledged it, but it was always gone in the morning. One evening, I found him staring at a small, framed photograph on his desk. It was of a young woman with his same dark eyes and a brilliant, unrestrained smile. "My sister, Hannah," he said without turning around. He knew I was there. He always knew. She was 17. She was caught in the crossfire between my father and a rival clan. They used her to send a message. His voice was devoid of emotion, a flat recitation of a fact that had hollowed him out. I was supposed to be watching her that day. I was a medical student, too busy with my own ambitions. His wound. He didn't just carry shame. He was drowning in it. It was the engine of his control, his coldness, his brutal efficiency. He was determined never to fail to protect someone like that again. And I, through a twist of cruel fate, was now under that suffocating, dangerous protection. The war with the Hashimoto clan simmered, a constant, low-grade threat, until the day it boiled over. Tatsuya had to attend a meeting, a supposed truce negotiation on neutral ground. He told me to stay in the penthouse, that it was the safest place in the city. But I had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. He was walking into a trap. I did something I never thought myself capable of. While he was gone, I searched his study. My fingers trembled as I bypassed the simple lock on his desk drawer. Inside, beneath a sheaf of financial reports, was a ledger. It was written in a cipher, but names and locations were clear. I recognized the name Hashimoto, and beside it, a location, an old fish market by the docks, and a time, an hour before his official meeting. It was the real meeting. The ambush. My heart pounded. I had a choice. Stay safe, or interfere in a world that would chew me up and spit me out. I thought of Hannah's smiling face. I thought of Tatsuya shielding me in the garden. I made my choice. I called Tanaka, Tatsuya's head of security. My voice was calm, authoritative, mimicking the tone I'd heard Tatsuya use. "There's been a change of plans," I said, giving him the address of the fish market. "The meeting is there. A security threat has been identified. You are to proceed with the entire tactical team. Do not alert the boss. This is a containment protocol." I was banking on the fact that Tanaka's loyalty was absolute, and a potential threat would override his standard orders. I was crossing a line, wielding an authority that wasn't mine, stepping directly into his war. It worked. I watched from the penthouse window as Tanaka's convoy of black cars diverted. An hour later, Tatsuya came home. He wasn't injured, but he was radiating a cold fury that was more terrifying than any weapon. He walked straight to me, his eyes burning into mine. "You countermanded my order," he said, his voice lethally soft. "Your meeting was an ambush," I said, standing my ground. "They were going to kill you. And you thought you could play the strategist?" he snarled, grabbing my arm. His grip was like iron. "You have no idea what you have done. You exposed my intelligence sources. You showed our hand. I saved your life. You risked everything," he roared, and then he stopped. His grip loosened. He looked down at my face, at the defiance and fear warring in my eyes. The fury drained out of him, replaced by something raw and unsettling. He backed away, running a hand through his perfect hair, messing it up for the first time since I'd met him. That night, one of the Hashimoto enforcers, seeking to curry favor, made a move of his own. He bypassed the penthouse security, a ghost slipping through the cracks. I was in my room when the door opened. It wasn't Tatsuya. The man was large, brutal, with a cruel smile. My blood turned to ice. Before I could even scream, Tatsuya was there. He moved like a phantom, a blur of black silk and controlled violence. The fight was short, brutal, and silent. It ended with the intruder on the floor, a small, ornate knife from Tatsuya's desk embedded in his throat. I was shaking, wrapped in a blanket, when Tatsuya came to me. He knelt, his hands bloody. He had a deep gash on his forearm, bleeding sluggishly. Without thinking, I went to the bathroom, grabbed the first aid kit, and began cleaning the wound. My hands were steady. My focus narrowed to the task, the neat slice in his skin, the dark blood. He watched me, his expression unreadable. The silence in the room was thick, charged with adrenaline and something more. "You should have been scared," he said, his voice rough. I admit it, my fingers working deftly, applying antiseptic. "But you were here." He reached up, his clean hand cupping my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheekbone. It was the most tender gesture I had ever received from him. "This world. It will stain you, Naomi," he whispered. "Look at my hands," I said, not looking up from his wound. "They're already stained with your blood." That was our confession. Not of love, but of a shared, dangerous reality. He pulled me closer, his forehead resting against mine. "I told myself keeping you was a strategy," he breathed, the words a ghost of a sound against my skin. I was lying to myself. The enemy had come for me in my home. The stakes were no longer about territory. They were personal. I was the heart of his war now. The attack in the penthouse was a declaration. The Hashimoto clan was no longer playing by the old rules. They had breached his fortress. They had targeted me. Tatsuya became a different man. The cold calculation was still there, but it was now fueled by a white-hot, protective rage. He doubled the guards, installed new security systems, and effectively locked me in our gilded cage. But it wasn't enough. We both knew the next attack was coming, and it would be decisive. The final confrontation came not with a bang, but with a quiet, insidious threat. The Hashimoto patriarch, a man old enough to be my grandfather but with the eyes of a snake, didn't send assassins. He sent a message. An envelope delivered by a legitimate courier. Inside was not a threat, but a photograph. It was of my mother, sitting on a park bench back home, completely unaware she was being watched. The message was clear. They could reach anyone, anywhere. My old life, the one I thought I had left behind, was now a weapon they could use against him. Tatsuya saw the photo, and the blood drained from his face. For the first time, I saw not just anger, but a flicker of genuine fear. It was the ghost of his sister, Hannah, rising again. He had failed to protect her, and now the enemy was threatening to make him fail again. "I will end this," he said, his voice a low, terrifying promise. He was preparing to go to war, to burn the Hashimoto clan to the ground, no matter the cost. "No," I said, putting my hand on his arm. "Your way, more people will die. My mother could be one of them. There has to be another way." "There is no other way," he said, his jaw tight. "They understand only one language. Then we have to speak it," I replied, my mind racing. But we have to be smarter. You said the patriarch is an old man. Old men have vanities. They have routines. I remembered the ledger I'd found. It wasn't just about ambushes. It detailed payments, shipments, and one recurring, discrete payment to a private clinic specializing in cardiac care. He has a bad heart, doesn't he? Tatsuya looked at me, a new light dawning in his eyes.
Yes.
How did you know? You're not the only doctor in the city, I said. And you're not the only one who can use a man's weakness against him. My plan was audacious, reckless, and morally gray. The Hashimoto patriarch visited his cardiologist every Tuesday. It was the one place he went with minimal security, trusting in the sanctity of a doctor's office. Tatsuya, Dr. Ishikawa, was one of the most respected surgeons in the country. He had influence. He made a call. The patriarch's regular doctor was suddenly called away for a family emergency. A replacement was sent. A highly recommended specialist, Dr. Ishikawa. I went with him. I posed as his nurse. Dressed in simple blue scrubs, my hair pulled back, I was invisible. We walked into the clinic, and I felt the world shift. I was no longer a victim. I was a conspirator. We were ushered into the examination room where the old man sat, looking frail and annoyed. He didn't recognize Tatsuya without the trappings of his power. Tatsuya was brilliant. He was the consummate professional, his voice calm and reassuring as he discussed the old man's condition. While he prepped a syringe, supposedly a vitamin injection, I saw the moment. The old man's bodyguard was distracted by a text. My job was simple, but critical. I accidentally dropped a tray of medical instruments. The loud clatter made the bodyguard jump, his attention fully on me as I apologized profusely. In that 2-second window, Tatsuya switched the syringe. He injected the patriarch not with vitamins, but with a powerful, fast-acting beta blocker. It wouldn't kill him, but combined with his condition, it would induce a severe cardiac episode within minutes. It would look like a natural medical event. We left the clinic. As we drove away, I saw the ambulance screaming toward the building. I had helped bring down the head of a criminal empire, not with a gun, but with a needle and a diversion. I had saved my mother and Tatsuya, but I had crossed a line I could never uncross. Back at the penthouse, the adrenaline faded, leaving a hollow feeling in its wake. Tatsuya stood by the window, watching the city lights. With the patriarch incapacitated, the Hashimoto clan would splinter, consumed by an internal power struggle. The threat was neutralized. "What you did today," he began, his back still to me. "No one in my world would have thought of it. They would have chosen bullets and knives." He turned to face me, his dark eyes intense. "You chose a scalpel. You were surgical." He walked to me, taking both of my hands in his. My empire, my territory, my family, they were things I managed, things I controlled. He looked down at our joined hands. "Now, they are yours to protect. You are the heart of this empire, Naomi. It beats because you are here." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something more profound. An acknowledgement. A transference of power. He was the king, but I had become the kingdom itself. A cost had been paid. The woman I used to be, the archivist who believed in rules and order, was gone. I had traded her for this life, for this man. The cost was my innocence. He lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to the platinum band on my finger. It no longer felt like a manacle. It felt like a crown. We stood on the balcony, the sprawling, glittering city laid out before us like a carpet of jewels. This was his world, born of violence and shadows. Now it was mine. I reached out and gently traced the head of the dragon tattoo peeking from the collar of his shirt. Its scales were cool beneath my fingertips. I had been left at the altar, a broken woman in a white dress. Now, I stood beside the most powerful man in Tokyo, dressed in his shadow, and I had never felt more whole. I had not been rescued. I had chosen. This was not a fairy tale. It was my life. And I was finally living it.